So there's two big stories today. Obviously, most of you know what they are. But there's a lot of different angles to these stories. Some that I'm sure you've heard about today and some that you probably haven't thought about today. And, of course, I'm going to be your voice of reason through it all. Try to be your voice of reason through it all. Because I've heard some voices of reason out there today and yesterday and this past week. But I've heard a lot of non-voices of reason. And I'm a little frustrated, actually, because I'm noticing something, and it's not necessarily new. It's not necessarily that big of a revelation. But it just seems to me that nobody has an interest in the truth right now. That no one has a real interest in what's really going on. And that's frustrating to me because I really do. I do. Most of you know, if you've listened to me for a long time, know I did not support Trump in the primaries. I supported him after he won, reluctantly, but I did, because there was some of his policies which I agreed with, and Hillary Clinton was a disaster, and he was the best option at the time. That's what I said on my show. That being said, I've defended him a lot, and I've criticized him a lot. But what I'm looking at today is I'm seeing two big narratives here. The right, not the right, but there's a lot of people out there, the Trump supporters, many on the right, who just want to defend Trump and say it's all about fake news, fake news, fake news. And there's a reason why they're doing that. That's understandable, actually. Because there is no doubt in my mind that these media outlets like the New York Times or Washington Post have a vested interest now in taking Trump down. In fact, it was reported that in the Washington Post newsroom, after the story broke, there were cheers and all that stuff. They do have a vested interest in taking Trump down. I don't think they really care about the truth. I think they have a vested interest in taking Trump down. The other side of this, though, is that Trump is incompetent in so many different ways, mostly because he's inexperienced at this, but because he just shoots from the hip. He's a little arrogant, a little narcissistic, as you all know. And, this isn't exactly new revelations. A lot of people that voted for Trump knew these things about Trump, but were willing to look past it for the message he had, for the purpose of his presidency. But this incompetence is a bad thing. And it's creating a lot of problems. And we're going to get to that, and we're going to get to the real story of that. But I want to talk about one thing here. It is breaking now. The two stories today, one that's breaking right now. New York Times has a piece, and now everyone's covering it, that it says, former FBI Director Comey memo says Trump asked him to end Flynn investigation. That's one story. The second story, obviously, that Trump meeting with the Russian ambassador and the Russians in the White House revealed classified information, apparently that was from Israel. Apparently the information came from Israel. It's coming from Jerusalem Post, New York Times, other places, that could be damaging to Israeli assets, to our allies. And there's a lot of problems with that, and he shouldn't have done that. But there's a lot of misunderstanding about that whole situation, too, that I'm finding out. But let's start with this memo from Comey. I'm just going from the actual New York Times report here. Okay? It says here, President Trump asked, oh, by the way, this is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. I know I waited way too long to get into it. There's a lot. You know what this is. You know who I am. You know this show has been on for a while. It's Beyond Reason Radio. You can catch the podcast at beyondreasonradio.com. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We got Tom Benson producing. We're going to get his comments on this as well. We're on Facebook Live as well. You can call 407-916-5400 or text to 23680. We're on till 9 p.m. tonight. And I have a lot to get to. I have some local Orlando stuff I want to get to as well, and some historical perspective I want to get to if we have time. This is what the New York Times piece says on Comey. President Trump asked the FBI Director James B. Comey to shut down the federal investigation into Trump's former national security advisor, Michael T. Flynn, in an Oval Office meeting in February, according to a memo Mr. Comey wrote shortly after the meeting. Now, this is pretty damaging because it would be obstruction of justice. And it just doesn't look good. But then it quotes the memo. And when you actually read the quote from the memo, it's not exactly what the New York Times is saying here. The memo says, "I hope you can let this go." That's what the president told Mr. Comey, according to the memo. It says further on, he says, this is what Trump told Comey. He says, "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He is a good guy. I hope you can let this go." Mr. Comey apparently did not say anything in response except only replying, "I agree. He's a good guy." Now, the White House has denied this version of events in the memo. They say, while the president has repeatedly expressed his views that General Flynn is a decent man who served and protected our country, the president has never asked Mr. Comey or anyone else to end any investigation, including any investigation involving General Flynn. Now, this is what I want to get at here. Saying, "I hope you let this go," is not the same as saying, "You need to end this investigation now." He's not telling him to end the investigation. He is saying a statement that, "I think Flynn is a good guy and I hope you can let this go." Is that the right thing to say? No, of course not. But is that the same thing as telling Comey to end the investigation? No, it's not. It's not the same thing. So that's my first example here of getting to the truth. And when I read a headline, and all the headlines say this everywhere, Comey memo says Trump asked him to end the Flynn investigation, and then I read the actual quotes, it's obvious to me that the New York Times and the Washington Post have an agenda. They're trying to create a narrative that Trump is in bed with Russia, or his campaign was at least, and that now he's trying to obstruct justice, and that's why he fired Comey. And the sad thing is there's probably some truth to some of this stuff that's being said. Going over to the Washington Post story that Trump leaked classified information. If this information really is damaging to our allies, it's not a good thing. That being said, we don't know exactly what was leaked. We don't know the information. And when you heard from National Security Advisor McMaster today, it was that it wasn't necessarily a big deal. What he said, that it was part of the conversation, that nobody in the room at the time thought it was a big deal, thought it was too much. It was part of the conversation. He is perfectly allowed to do it. And there's a good chance that what he revealed, maybe the Russians didn't need to know. I don't know. We don't know. But not only that, there's a good chance that Trump was also incompetent and just shooting from the hip, which he does, and that's what a lot of people are saying, and it caused some problems. But, and I'm learning this a lot lately about a lot of different things, what the media says and the narratives that's created on both sides is often very different than what's actually happening in the actual situation. It could be that this aide heard about it, the aide that apparently leaked this, and there's information about the person who apparently leaked this now. Not who it is, but Eric Erickson has a piece on him or her, we don't know, saying that this person's actually a Trump supporter, and that creates a whole nother problem. That being said, the person that leaked it could have been totally exaggerating the extent of it, misunderstanding the extent of it, thinking it was a bigger deal than it actually was. And this got blown up into something bigger than it actually is. Does that mean what Trump did is right? No. Does that mean the reaction is right? Not necessarily right either. So let's go to McMaster. McMaster, at first he said the Washington Post thing was wrong, although he didn't really say it. McMaster yesterday in the White House lawn made a comment on this, and let's play it here real quick. Tom Benson, go ahead and play cut one of McMaster for me.
There's nothing that the president takes more seriously than the security of the American people. The story that came out tonight, as reported, is false. The president and the foreign minister reviewed a range of common threats to our two countries, including threats to civil aviation. At no time were intelligence sources or methods discussed. And the president did not disclose any military operations that were not already publicly known. Two other senior officials who were present, including the Secretary of State, remember the meeting the same way and have said so. Their on-the-record accounts should outweigh those of anonymous sources. And I was in the room. It didn't happen.
Okay, so he said it didn't happen. But then Trump tweets out this morning. He says, as president, I wanted to share with Russia at an openly scheduled White House meeting, which I have the absolute right to do, which Trump is right, he does have the right to do, facts pertaining to terrorism and airline flight safety. Now, talking about airline flight safety, McMaster mentioned there about, airlines. Humanitarian reasons. Plus, I want Russia to greatly step up the fight against ISIS and terrorism. So people are saying that contradicts what McMaster said. Trump is basically admitting. He's not exactly admitting, but he is admitting that he talked to Russia about something. So McMaster comes out today in a press conference and he tries to clarify what he meant and what everyone said, because that's what we have to do now with Trump and the Twitter verse. We have to clarify what things are meant because we don't exactly know what Trump means because he just tweets out these small comments. This is what McMaster said today.
No, I stand by my statement that I made yesterday. And what I'm saying is really the premise of that article is false, that in any way the president had a conversation that was inappropriate or that resulted in any kind of lapse in national security. And so I think the real issue, and I think what I'd like to see really debated more, is that our national security has been put at risk by those violating confidentiality and those releasing information to the press that could be used connected with other information available to make American citizens and others more vulnerable.
So what McMaster is saying there, and I think this is really getting to the bottom of what's really happening here, is that Trump did reveal some stuff, but that according to McMaster, what he revealed was not a threat to national security, was not a threat to our interest or our allies. That part of it is being overblown. And I think that might actually be true. I think it's extremely possible that what Trump revealed is not the biggest deal in the world. But I don't think the Washington Post and the New York Times and CNN and a lot of these people really care about what he revealed. I don't think they care. I don't think they care that he might have damaged national security. They didn't care when Obama did it over and over and over again. They don't care about that. They want to create a narrative that Trump is incompetent, but that Trump is also putting Russia over the interests of the United States. Sometimes their narrative actually kind of gets confusing, but that Trump is not fit for the job. And it all has to do with his dealings with the Russians. Do you honestly think if Trump revealed some of this stuff to Israel, revealed something to Israel from another ally, that this would have been a big story today? No, it's a big story because it has to do with Russia. And it continues the narrative that there's some connection between the Trump administration, Trump, and Russia. Does that mean that Trump did the right thing here? I don't know, because I don't know what was revealed. Nobody does. He might have screwed up. And it might possibly be not in the best interest. Now, is he allowed to do it? Yes. But the reaction of this is totally crazy with everything dealing with the Trump administration. I'm not hearing anybody actually caring what was revealed. Very little of that has to do with it. It's all this narrative that Trump revealed something and that's bad. That Trump talked to the Russians and that's bad. And with this Comey thing, it's the same thing. I'm not hearing what Trump actually told Comey. I'm hearing that Trump wants Trump told him to end the investigation. Well, if you read the actual quote, that's not what he said. He said he implied that he wants it to end, but he didn't say Comey end this investigation. He just says, I hope you can let this go. That's completely different. Should he have said that? No, of course not. And we can have real criticisms, but I'm not seeing the real criticisms here.
Here's something I find out that's pretty interesting. It says here that Comey shared the existence of this memo with senior FBI officials and close associates. The New York Times has not viewed a copy of the memo, which is unclassified, but one of Comey's associates read parts of the memo to a Times reporter. A, does Comey know that this was leaked? Who is the leaker? Is he currently an FBI employee? And what's his association with Comey? And what's Comey's involvement in the possible leak of this memo at this time?
Yeah.
It's his way of fighting back?
Well, and that's the other narrative. And the problem is we don't know. There's so many things that I look at, and we all jump to conclusions, and we've all jumped to conclusions. The Democrats have jumped to conclusions. And the fact is we don't know. We don't know what's really happening here. All I can go with the actual facts of what we know. And I can go, and the real story here is one, there's a massive distrust in of the media today. And there's a reason for that, which I'm going to get to. But two, there's a problem inside the White House between Trump and the people in his administration. And that's a real problem. And Eric Erickson addressed this. So I'm going to take a break here. I want to play some. I'm going to play some voices of reason on all this. I think get the Russia thing exactly right. And we have a lot more to get to. We can take your calls and texts as well. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
It would be beyond reason not to listen to Yaffee on your TuneIn Radio app. Download the app today and search Beyond Reason Radio. The voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason is back now.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Yes, I am your voice of reason, your voice of truth in a world that is beyond reason. Beyond Reason. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We have Tom Benson, who is producing as well. We've been talking about the latest with the Trump administration. Unfortunately, I would love to be able to get to other things. And that's the real crisis here, is tax reform is not done. Healthcare is not done. There's a lot of things that have not been done that should have been accomplished by now. The wall's not being built. There's some good things that Trump is doing, but we're being distracted by all this stuff.
When does he leave? Friday on his trip?
Yeah, now that's kind of blown.
Well, today or tomorrow, he's got to come out with a nominee to be this, I would think, head of the FBI.
Yeah, that's true, too. And so there's so much, and Trump handles all this so badly. There's better ways to handle this stuff. But I wanted to play some voices of reason and all this. You know, it's funny when we talk about, I'm seeing people, this is grounds for impeachment. What Trump did in revealing this information to the Russians is grounds for impeachment. I never heard these same people say the same thing when Obama was caught on mic telling Medvedev, when he was the president of Russia, hey, tell Putin I'll have more flexibility after the election. Remember that? What was that all about? And he says, I transmit this to Vladimir. And none of these people were calling for impeachment. The Washington Post, New York Times didn't care as much. And this is the problem. The Washington Post and New York Times could be right on a lot of this stuff, but nobody trusts you anymore because of the double standard. And I'm going to get to more of that in a second, but I want to play two cuts here. I want to play Senator Ben Sasse. He was asked about this on Fox and Friends this morning, and I thought he had some interesting comments on this in terms of what he thinks about this. And I think he is a voice of reason in this whole Russia thing. The Comey thing is just breaking. This Comey memo is just breaking. We've talked about that. We're going to get more into that as well. Trey Gowdy, I just saw he wants the whole memo to be released before we have judgment on it, not just these quotes, because these quotes are not as damaging as the New York Times is suggesting. So we'll get more to that. But on the Russia thing, this is what Ben Sasse had to say.
Yes, there's a lot we don't know yet. There's a whole bunch of stuff being reported that may be a little bit overheated, not clear. But the reason that we need to be really careful with sources and methods is because they're the lifeblood of the intel community, and we need spies out there fighting for American interests. I think you're going to see some national media use language like illegality. That's sort of goofy because it's very, very difficult for a president to break laws related to classified information because he's the ultimate declassifier. But the debate about imprudence, that's a really important debate. And the fact that this happened with the Russians isn't helpful because they don't have our interests at heart. They never did. No, they want to fracture NATO, and we need to be really on guard because Russia and our interests do not align.
So I think he makes a lot of good points there. He's saying, a lot of this is heated because there's a lot we don't know. There's still a lot we don't know, but maybe we still should be concerned for policy reasons. And what that means is we should be concerned with the policy that's friendly towards Russia because Russia doesn't have our interests at heart. But none of this is focused on that aspect. We're not focused on the policy aspect that maybe Trump is wrong in his policy or foreign policy decisions. That should be the true focus. We're focused on Trump's in bed with Russia. Trump should be impeached. Trump is incompetent. All this stuff. And I think he made some good points. Now, another one who I thought was a voice of reason in all this was Charles Krauthammer yesterday on Special Report. I have 2 cuts from him here. Go ahead and play the first cut where he talked about this.
I think these statements are completely irresponsible from the DNC. They have no idea what was revealed. They have no idea the gravity of it. It can be, perhaps it's not, but this is just pure opportunism and a reflex reaction, and particularly since their candidate for the presidency had been spilling classified information, some of the highest level for a year and a half, and the Democrats pretended it either wasn't a problem or that it should be ignored. It's rather unseemly. Having said that, the issue is we don't know what the information was. Probably the content of it is not the problem. What it sounds as if is that we have an ally who's infiltrated into ISIS, and this might have helped the Russians see that, and perhaps, knowing the Russians, that information would be spilled elsewhere, because after all, the Russians are allied with Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, others. So that information could spread.
So, of course, he makes some good points here. He says, 1, the DNC, the Democrats, the left are overreacting. Of course they are, because they smell blood in the water. The media smells blood in the water here. They're going to find every which way they can now to take Trump down because they have an agenda. We have to remember they have an agenda. But he also makes a good point that nobody cares necessarily about the content of what was revealed. It might have not been the worst thing. The people in the room didn't seem to think it was that big of a deal. But it could be a problem because we shouldn't be as friendly with Russia as Trump wants to be. And maybe that should be the real debate here. But Krauthammer, I have a second cut here where he talks about the real problem in the Trump administration and makes a good point.
I don't think anybody is talking about illegalities. The president has the right to declassify anything, anytime he wants. Not a question of did he act illegally. Was it unwisely? And one, of all the probabilities, the idea that he was acting as a Manchurian candidate, feeding information to his Russian operatives and controllers is ridiculous. The only implication here is that he's unschooled. This is his first go-around with sensitive information, and he might have slipped up. If he did, it's not good. On the other hand, if it's not deliberate, it's not exactly a high crime and misdemeanor.
So, and that makes a good chance, too. He might have just slipped up, revealed maybe a little bit too much, even though people in the room didn't seem to think so. It's not necessarily high crime and misdemeanor. It shows incompetence. Maybe it shows inexperience. And I think that's what a lot of this is. It's just inexperience. I think even with the Comey thing, I think a lot of this is just inexperience. Not only how he handled the firing, but this whole, what he was saying to Comey, I hope you would let this go. He probably just was having a casual conversation thinking that was okay. He wasn't telling him to end the investigation. He was just saying, I hope you would let this go, and thinking that's okay to say, but an experienced politician would know you don't say something like that. So what's the real issue here, other than Trump maybe revealing something that he shouldn't be revealing, other than Trump saying to stuff Comey maybe he probably shouldn't have said? But the real issue here that we're going to get to in the next segment is this whole issue of he doesn't have the trust of the people in his administration. And that's why the leaks are coming out, and we have some information on that. Not only that, but no matter what comes out on this, a lot of people on the right and Trump supporters are not going to believe the Washington Post or the New York Times. And there's a reason for that, because it's obviously have an agenda. Even if they're telling the truth on some of the things, it's obvious they have an agenda. But there's also a double standard. So this creates real problems in our country when we don't really want to search for the truth. And I'm seeing this on both sides. We're not really interested in the truth. We get in our groups and we want our side to win. And both sides are doing this right now. And it's not good. It's not what I'm interested in. I mean, you talk about what I'm interested in. If Trump does get impeached, that means Mike Pence is president. And I love Mike Pence. So it's not the end of the world to me. other than it would be very difficult to get things done because he would be after an impeached president and it would be very difficult for the Republicans to win Congress and all that. I understand that. But Mike Pence would make a great president. But I don't think it's worth the whole impeachment talk yet. I don't know. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you miss any of the show, you can download the Beyond Reason podcast on iTunes. This is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. Beyond Reason Radio continues now.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. If you have a comment on anything we're talking about, you can give us a call at 407-916-5400 or text to 23680. There was something in the Washington Post report on Trump revealing something to the Russians that I found very interesting. Isn't getting a lot of attention, but I think it says a lot of what's really going on here. They talked to Senator Bob Corker, Republican from Tennessee. He said, I would like to know a little bit more about it before he comments on the revelations, but added, obviously they are in a downward spiral right now, and I've got to figure out a way to come to grips with all that's happening. And the shame of it is, there's a really good national security team in place. He continues on. He says, the chaos that is being created by the lack of discipline is creating an environment that I think creates a worrisome environment.
You know who that's a reference to?
What?
Trump.
Well, that's what I mean. That's exactly what it is. There is a lack of discipline in the administration with how things are handled, with how things are done. And that goes all the way to the top. That is Trump's responsibility. Trump has to set the tone. He has to set the agenda. He has to set the discipline. And when we're saying discipline, we're not saying, fire everybody and get all new people. We're talking about getting people on your side, getting people on your team, getting people to work for you in a disciplined manner. And the more evidence that this is really the problem here, because it might not be a big deal what Trump said, but the problem is the people in the administration who have maybe some legitimate concerns about some things Trump are doing, which happens in every administration. Some of the stuff that's happening with Trump happens in every administration, really. I'm sure Obama's had conversations like this with other diplomats where he revealed stuff, but the aides didn't leak it everywhere because they could tell Obama himself their concerns or they could talk about it. But according to a report by Eric Erickson, what's really going on in the administration is Trump is not willing to listen. He's not willing to take any criticism. He's not willing to really engage with his staff and create and set a tone, set an agenda, set a message. And the people in his administration are just so fed up with it all that they go to the media.
Got to wonder where the family is in this situation right now. Ivanka and Kushner.
Yeah, they've been kind of out of the loop on this. And people ask, okay, why does Trump go to his family then all the time? Well, it's why they say, why does Trump go to his family? That's like a dictator stuff. No, the reason why Trump goes to Ivanka and Jared Kushner is because he trusts them. Mm-hmm. That's why. That's the only reason, because all these leaks. But according to Eric Erickson, he says, I tend to take these stories about President Trump with a grain of salt. But he says he knows the leaker in this situation. And he says the source is solidly supportive of President Trump, or at least has been and was during the campaign. But this source told Eric Erickson that the president will not take any internal criticism, no matter how politely it is given. He does not want advice, cannot be corrected, and is too insecure to see any constructive feedback as anything other than an attack. So some of the sources are left with no other option but to go to the media, leak the story, and hope the intense blowback gives the president a swift kick in the butt. The problem is it usually doesn't. The problem is usually Trump just doubles down. Perhaps then he will recognize he screwed up This is the real problem here, that the Trump administration is very unorganized because the man at the top does not have a focused agenda, a focused message. And it's easy to fix. But if you just have this fear and his staff to ever have any kind of criticism, constructive criticism, then you're not going to get anything done. Because you need that in a situation like this. Okay, so they go to the Washington Post, they go to the New York Times. The problem with going to them as well, going to these media outlets as well, is because those media outlets have an agenda against Trump. And what I mean by that is there's probably a lot of truth to what they're saying, but it's the double standard that hurts people. So you're going to have a lot of people on the other side just say this is fake news. They're not going to listen to you anymore. They're not listening to you anymore because they don't believe you have the best interests of the country at heart. They don't believe you have the truth really at heart. They believe your goal is to take down Donald Trump. And that's a problem. And we are so divided now on both sides that this is what we do. So the truth loses. And this is revealed in a new study by Pew Research. According to a new study by Pew Research Center conducted March 13th through the 27th with 4,000 adults from within the U.S., only 11% of Republicans trust the mainstream media to report the news accurately. Additionally, a whopping 87% of Republicans found the news media to be politically biased to one side of the aisle. 47% of Democrats denied a media bias. So 11% of Republicans, that's it, believe the mainstream media. Now, I think a lot of them would believe the mainstream media when they want to, when it's a positive story about the guy, then they believe them, and that's the other problem. But the problem is, it's hard to trust the New York Times and the Washington Post because there were so many instances in the Obama administration where Obama did very damaging stuff to the national security interests of this country. There were times where Obama leaked stuff about Israel and about Iran to people they shouldn't have leaked it against Israel's best interest. There were times Obama did that. There were other things Obama did that were against our national security, especially against Israel. But the New York Times and the Washington Post didn't have an agenda. They didn't focus on it as much. And so people on the right, they see the double standard. You know, I did a show on this forever, months ago, about playing audio clips about how all these people were against Trump and things that Trump did, but they didn't care when Obama did it. So the Washington Post and the New York Times are going to come up with stuff, and people aren't going to believe them, and we are just so divided. That's why I think they talk about impeachment and all that. It's very dangerous to go down that road because we are so divided, and you are going to get possibly half this country standing up for Trump then. And it creates more of that division we see because nobody's interested in the truth. If the Washington Post and the New York Times were interested in the truth, they would have been doing stuff like this to Obama and not just to Trump. So you see what's going on here. So now we have a point in this country. We don't trust each other. We don't trust our institutions. We don't trust our president. We don't trust the media. We don't trust each other. And that's the real issue here that's at play. We have to really want to search for the truth in these situations and not just get so defensive of, quote unquote, our side. 407-916-5400, text to 23680. Let's take a call real quick from Eva in Orlando. Eva, what's your take on all this?
I'm having a ball.
What's that?
I'm having a ball.
You're having a ball? Go ahead. What does that mean?
But because all I do all day is listen to the news and people like you that haven't lived long enough to know what's going on. Been there, done all of it. So I'm reliving everything.
What do you mean haven't lived long enough to know what's going on?
You only know today. and I would say you're about in your middle 30s.
Okay. I'm 30, yes, but 31.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen this before.
Okay.
You know, and I'm enjoying it. All these people are shaking. It shows you people don't believe what they say. We say that we're Christians.
Okay.
Now, God's got everything under control. That's what the Bible says. You either believe it or you don't.
Okay. What does that have to do with anything we're talking about?
It has everything to do with it. Because the media, and we're talking about the media, said that Hillary Clinton was going to win. Did
yes.
she? Did she? Is she in the White House?
Okay.
Well, if God's not in control, she would have been in the White House.
I never said God wasn't. I mean, if Hillary was in the White House, that would have been part of God's plan, too. I've never said God wasn't in control. So what's your point?
Didn't say that, but I'm saying everybody that, I think 27 million people claim to be Christians, but they say what they are. Now, I can say I'm a car, but that doesn't make me a car.
Okay. You're totally off topic. I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. I'm sorry. What does this have to do with anything we're talking about? We're discussing what's happening in the Trump administration. We're discussing the angles. We're discussing the implication. It has nothing to do. Of course, God's in ultimate control. No one's saying he's not. What does that have to do with? We're not. Nothing to do with what we're talking about. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
The conscience in your ear telling you the difference between right and wrong. Yaffee is back on the air.
So we've been talking about the two big stories of the day. One is breaking news as of not too long ago that the New York Times is reporting that former FBI Director James Comey has a memo that says Trump asked him to end the Flynn investigation. Although when you read it, Trump's exact words were, "I hope you can let this go. Flynn is a good guy." It's not exactly the same as asking him to end the investigation. That's a little different. We went over that. If you missed any of the show, make sure to catch the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Best way to do it is to download the Beyond Reason radio app. The other thing we went over is a new study by the Pew Research Center that says only 11% of Republicans trust the mainstream media to report the news accurately.
The interesting thing on that is only 34% of the Democrats believe it's accurate. 34%. That's not very much at all. The other thing is when news organizations are asked if they're one-sided, Democrats say 87% yes. No, Republicans 87% yes, and Democrats 53%. Again, that's over half think that the news media is also one-sided, and they're Democrats. Yeah,
it's yeah. I mean, really, this is just revealing our divide in the country, is it not? More than anything, we just don't trust the other side.
Sure. Well, there's a divide. That's one aspect. The other aspect is the media has a tough road to reestablish their credibility with a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, and people always compare this whole situation to Watergate, and that's one reason you really can't, because Watergate, most people trusted those media outlets back then. So they had a lot more credibility to the American people. The New York Times and the Washington Post do not have as much credibility as we're finding out to the American people.
And back then, you only had 3 networks, right, news networks.
So you're going to have if they actually went through some kind of impeachment, you're going to have a lot of pushback. Not only that, but you have to remember Republicans own the House and the Senate. So first, the Democrats would have to win Congress, which is possible if things get this crazy. But we'll see what happens. So I want to end this hour. We'll get to more of this stuff in the next hour. But we need to end on a lighter note. Yes, we have something that made Yaffee laughy, and that will make you laugh as one. Actually, it has to do with the whole subject, but I have to admit it's pretty funny. And, of course, it has to do with Rosie O'Donnell. You know, not that anything she says is funny, but you get to laugh at her. Let's just put it that way. So Rosie O'Donnell put out a tweet today, got a whole bunch of backlash. This is what she said. When Trump goes, so does Sessions, and Gorsuch gets removed, Garland sworn in, every EO invalidated, we take the country back, #America. When Trump goes, so does Sessions, Gorsuch gets removed, Garland sworn in, every EO executive order invalidated, we take the country back. What's the problem with that tweet?
It's impossible to happen. It won't happen. Somebody doesn't understand how it works.
Exactly right. Obviously, someone doesn't understand how all this works. And people are tweeting back. One person tweeted back in response, said, "Did you skip 9th grade civics?" Another person says, "This is all clearly spelled out in Article 8 of the Constitution." As a joke. Article 8 of the Constitution, get it? Because there's one. And a bunch of things like that. Obviously, this cannot happen because if Trump goes, who gets put in place? Mike Pence.
The man from Indiana.
The Vice President, Mike Pence. Not only that, but that does in no way invalidate the Supreme Court pick of Neil Gorsuch. He doesn't get removed. There's no way that if you impeach the president that they would remove that person. That's not how it works.
He was confirmed by the legislative branch of government.
Right. And then Garland getting sworn in. Well, that doesn't matter because Gorsuch wouldn't be removed. And Mike Pence would not just remove him and nominate Gorsuch. This isn't that difficult. Another person said in response says, "It looks like you're writing unsubstantiated nonsense. Would you like to turn on all caps?" Because she had this in all caps like it made it right. Most people were just saying that's just not how it works. Another person says, "Not really, but tweeting it in all caps makes it true." Let's see. One person said, "Ugh, no, this isn't remotely true. You aren't helping." Another person says, "That's my wish. Go make your own." Oh, it's just a wish. Just a nice general wish, I guess. So it's just crazy town that we're dealing with all this stuff in response to this. I hope the Democrats realize that if Trump gets impeached, it would just mean Mike Pence is president, by the way, who's actually a lot more conservative than Trump on a lot of issues. Just saying. This has been the first hour of Beyond Reason Radio. If you missed any of the show, I will post the podcast of the show. Just go to BeyondReasonRadio.com or download the Beyond Reason Radio app. Make sure to like Beyond Reason Radio on Facebook, or you can send me a friend request on Facebook, and I will accept it. Follow me on Twitter at Beyond Reason R. We have a lot more to get to. I want to get into some local stuff. I want to get into what Ann Coulter said about Trump, and we'll get into the breaking news as well. So stay tuned. We have one more hour to go. Yay, let's jump to conclusions day. Yay! This is what we do now. We all jump to conclusions on everything because we don't really care about what's really going on in most situations. We just want our side to win and bash the other side. This is America in 2017. So much Beyond Reason stuff to go through. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. There is breaking news. We talked about all of this in the first hour in a lot of detail. We were on 7 to 8. We're on until 9 p.m. If you missed any of that, I will post the podcast after the show. You really need to listen to the first hour. So what you have to do is send me a friend request on Facebook, Michael Yaffee, or you can like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page, or you can download the Beyond Reason Radio app. And by the way, I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, and we have Tom Benson producing as well. Tom, how is your day going today?
Well, it's sort of like what they used to say about the weather. If you don't like the weather, wait 36 hours. It's like if you don't particularly care for what's going on in the news, just wait 36 hours. Things will change completely.
Something else will go on. And, it's a shame that all this is going on because Trump has actually done some really good stuff this week that I didn't really get to in the first hour. Maybe I should get to that here. But the breaking news is that the New York Times has this report that Comey sent a memo, Director Comey, saying that Trump asked him to end the Flynn investigation. Obviously, that would be a big deal. Obviously, that could be seen as obstruction of justice. Obviously, it's not something Trump should do. Then we have the whole Russia thing where Trump apparently gave intel to Russia. Nobody cares what the intel actually was or how damaging it really was, or maybe if it was necessary for him to do it. Nobody cares about that. All they care about is the narrative that he would do that with Russia so they can take down Trump, or that he's incompetent. Even though McMaster and other people in the room didn't seem to think it was as big of a deal as some others. It seems like the real story is that there is a lot of dissent in the Trump administration. That is Trump's own fault because there's got to be reasons why they're not loyal to him. And this is from Trump's supporters leaking this stuff now in his own administration. But on the Comey thing, when you actually read what has been released in the memo, this is what it says. Trump said this to Comey: "I hope you can let this go. I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He's a good guy. I hope you can let this go." Now, is that something maybe Trump should say? Probably not. Probably not the best decorum. But is that a direct command asking him to stop the investigation? Not really. He's just saying a general comment that he believes Flynn's a good guy and that he wishes or hopes that he would let it go. That's not obstruction of justice. There was no order from the president to say that. It was just a comment from someone who obviously doesn't know how all this works in Donald Trump. So that's what I mean about jumping to conclusions. It's easy to jump to conclusions when you read the headline, but then when you look at what was actually said, now we have to read the whole memo. We have to get all the information. That's fine. But we have become such a nation where all we do is jump to conclusions. And by the way, we do this on both sides. Because when the New York Times or the Washington Post put out stories, immediately the right says fake news, we can't trust them. We jump to conclusions that it's fake. And there's a reason for that, which I detailed in the first hour. It's because there's been an obvious double standard with these outlets, and there's obviously intention against Trump with these media outlets. So you have to be able to take what they're saying with a little bit of a grain of salt and understand that there is an agenda here. That doesn't mean what they're saying is wrong, but there's an agenda, and the way things are crafted could mean that there's an agenda. Just like you would with a conservative outlet, sometimes there's an agenda. Doesn't mean what the conservative outlet is saying is wrong, but you have to remember that there's a bias there. The difference is the Washington Post, New York Times don't admit their bias, but it's obviously there. So, but what's really frustrating about this whole situation, and it's something that, I'm obviously not the only one frustrated about, and Coulter is extremely frustrated about this, and we'll get to that in a sec, but that the things that need to get done are not getting done. Not only that, but this overshadows some of the good things that Trump has done even this week. An example of a good thing that Trump is doing, I have some audio of this actually, Tom Benson, labeled officers, is Trump, first they lit the White House blue for Officer, now I'm having a brain fart on the name, Officer Appreciation Day, I think it was.
Yeah, for those fallen heroes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And supporting police, obviously. And then he spoke at an event where he talked about this as well and his appreciation for officers. This is what he said.
Words cannot express the depths of our gratitude, but I hope that our actions will show you how deeply we care and how strongly we feel about protecting those who protect us.
Okay, that's a great thing for a president to do. It's been so missed. And by the way, that kind of thing is very appealing to a lot of people. I'm telling you, there are a lot of people in this country that still are going to support Trump a lot because of stuff like that. They're going to ignore all this other stuff, say it's media fake news and all that stuff because of stuff like that Trump did. You can't discount that. Now, another thing that Trump did that was pretty good this week was a commencement speech at Liberty University. That was very inspiring. That was very good. That a lot of people really liked. And, here's part of it. I have the audio of the commencement thing. Do you have it there, Tom Benson? All right, go ahead and play it.
Never, ever give up. There'll be times in your life you'll want to quit, you'll want to go home, perhaps to that wonderful mother that's sitting back there watching you and say, Mom, I can't do it. Go back home and tell Mom, Dad, I can do it. I can do it. I will do it. You're going to be successful. The fact is, no one has ever achieved anything significant without a chorus of critics standing on the sidelines explaining why it can't be done. Nothing is easier or more pathetic than being a critic, because they're people that can't get the job done. But the future belongs to the dreamers, not to the critics.
Okay, and I don't have anything against critics. Obviously, I'm a critic in a way, but and I love movie critics, for instance. I watch them all the time. But I think it was a good speech in terms of, saying in this country you have the opportunity to have success as an individual if you work hard and don't give up on your dream. I mean, it's a very positive message. It's a good message. It was a lot of people were inspired by that message. It's a good thing. Trump does some good things. But there's a lot more that needs to be done. But we're so distracted by all this other stuff. And the sad thing is it doesn't need to be that way. There's very simple solutions to all this. One, don't just jump on Twitter and tweet that you're going to end press briefings, that you have recordings of Comey and contradict your aides. Two, communicate with your staff. So if you have a message and you have an agenda, make sure your staff is on board with what you're doing. Show some discipline, show some organization to what you're doing in your administration, and you can get things done. I know Trump doesn't want to do this. I know he wants to shoot from the hip, but this is all easily done. But it goes to another criticism of Trump, and it actually came from all people, one of Trump's biggest supporters, Ann Coulter, who even wrote a book called In Trump We Trust. And she did an interview with the Daily Caller. I'm sure a lot of you have heard it by now, where she talks about how she is not happy with a lot of stuff of the Trump administration so far. And it really has nothing to do with the Russia thing or anything else. It has to do with the fact that he hasn't kept a lot of his promises. And this was what I was really concerned about in the primaries and the election, because Trump's not a real conservative in a lot of issues. So, and he's changed his position a lot of times, so it's hard to tell what he was actually going to. This is what should be talked about today, is the fact that there are things that Trump said he would do that aren't getting done. And the biggest thing, of course, to Ann Coulter is the wall. This is what Ann Coulter said. And a lot of people are saying, oh, well, it's too soon in the administration to get things done. Not really. He's had opportunities to do this stuff and he's caved, and that's why Ann Coulter is upset. And Trump was supposed to be different. Remember, he said he was going to do all this in the first 100 days. He said he was going to do all this in day one, and then we're going to try to excuse it that he's not done it now. I mean, that's not fair. If the shoe was on the other foot and if it was Obama, we would be criticizing the same way. Ann Coulter said this, I'm not very happy with what has happened so far. I guess we have to try to push him to keep his promises, but this isn't North Korea, and if he doesn't keep his promises, I'm out. This is why we voted for him. I think everyone who voted for him knew his personality was grotesque. It was the issues. How many times did I say that on the show, by the way? A bajillion times. The Democrats try to make it about his personality. He said his supporters don't care because they support his message and they support the issues. And Ann Coulter just revealed exactly that. Ann Coulter said Trump was our last shot. I kind of thought it was Romney, and then lo and behold, like a miracle, Trump comes along. I still believe in Trumpism. I have no regrets for ferociously supporting him. What choice do we have? We had no choice. Yeah, I mean, my fingers are still crossed. It's not like I'm out yet, but boy, things don't look good. I've said to other people, it's as if we're in Chicago and Trump tells us he's going to get us to LA in 6 days, but the first 3 days we are driving towards New York. Yes, it is true he can still turn around and get us to LA in 3 days, but I'm a little nervous. And a lot of Trump supporters are bashing Ann Coulter for this. But all she's trying to do is hold the president accountable. Isn't that what we all should try to do, even if we support him? Is hold him accountable, put pressure on him to make sure that he keeps his promises? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. He says, are you going to be apologizing to these never-Trumpers, is what Daily Caller person asked. And Coulter said, I don't apologize for supporting Trump. He said all the right things and nobody else would even say it. I suppose it's possible that another politician who really meant it would come along. He says, I got to tell you, when I wrote Adios America, I thought there was a 10% chance of saving the country. On the evening of November 8, I thought, wow, we have a 90% chance now. This is a chance that comes along once every 1,000 years. We can save America now. She says, and now I don't know. I'm someplace between 10 and 90, which is a big gap, but. And then she says, she makes a lot of really good points here. Says, I do, of course, blame Congress most of all. They are swine. They only care about their own careers. Who knows how much of it is corruption and how much of it is pure stupidity? They're the opposition party to Donald Trump. This is really something we've never seen before. The president stands alone. Yet, I really appreciate, despite all this, that Ann Coulter isn't necessarily blames Congress. Yes, Congress is a lot responsible for this stuff not getting done. But you can't absolve Trump from all blame either because he's the de facto leader of the party right now. What do you all think about Trump's... What do you think about Ann Coulter's comments here? Do you think she has a point here? I think she does. And really, this is what should be talked about now. We should be debating health care reform now. We should be debating taxes now. We should be debating the wall now. We should be debating whether Trump is going to or can keep his promises and what's Congress doing. But we're so distracted by all this stuff, and Trump doesn't help. Because all he has to do is shut his mouth and just focus on the other stuff. And a lot of this controversial stuff will just go away. But he doesn't shut his mouth because, well, it's Donald Trump. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We have a lot more to get to this hour, including I'm going to end the hour with a new segment I've had of You Just Can't Make This Stuff Up. Things so beyond reason, you can't make it up. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you like Beyond Reason Radio, well, make sure to show it by liking the Facebook page at facebook.com/Beyond Reason Radio. The place where we talk faith, culture, and politics. Beyond Reason Radio continues.
So it's practically predictable. You have a bunch of Democrat lawmakers and others right now, as outspoken critics, already calling for Trump's impeachment. And the problem with this is they've been calling for this, and so many have been calling for this before he was even inaugurated. So, and this is what I talk about with the Washington Post and the New York Times coming out with this stuff against Trump, with the Comey letter, with the Russian thing, is you've lost a lot of your credibility because you have this double standard, and you've obviously had an agenda against Trump for a while now. And you wonder why Trump fights back and says you're fake news and all that stuff. And it seems like nobody cares about the truth. They just care about their side winning. So the Washington Post obviously had some truth in what they were saying. The source was a Trump supporter, according to Eric Erickson. And Trump probably revealed something to the Russians. Was it worth impeachment? We don't know. Was it the worst thing in the world? We don't know. And then the Comey thing, the New York Times has an agenda. They released this Comey memo implying that Trump tried to stop the investigation into Mike Flynn. When you read the actual words of it, it says, I hope you can let this go. That's what Trump said. That's totally different than totally trying to stop an investigation. Was it the right thing to say? No. I don't think it was the right thing to say. but there's an agenda there. So you lose credibility. So the Democrats have lost a lot of their credibility because they've been calling for impeachment forever. So, and this is what I told them in the beginning. You know, when Trump first got elected and everyone was going nuts already, protesting all that stuff, I said, don't get all outrageous now, because if Trump actually does something worth the outrage, you will have lost your credibility, because people just think you're outrageous because you hate Trump. You're outraged because you just hate Trump. And that's what's happening. That's why it's important for institutions like the New York Times and the Washington Post to not have a double standard. But they're not going to listen to that. They have an obvious double standard. So that's why we are in the place we're in, where we have two sides of every issue. So some Democrats, we have Congressman Al Green from Texas, who is calling for the president to be impeached. Let's see, who else is calling for Representative Jared Huffman here from California. Democrats says impeachment will happen if a handful of Republicans in Congress join Dems to put country above party. Let's see, Representative Jeffries said, I'm getting all this from Fox News, by the way. I've heard of Jeffries. I'm trying to remember where exactly he's from. It just has his tweet, but it says evidence of Trump's effort to obstruct justice continues to emerge. And then says lock him up? ? You hear all that. But Kucinich came out, former Ohio congressman. He said that he called for impeachment of President George W. Bush and, Dick Cheney over Iraq. But he says it is destructive to America to proceed with an impeachment at this stage of the presidency. This is not the first thing you reach for, because when the first big move a party makes is towards impeachment, it's very difficult for the American people to conclude that it's anything but a partisan issue. Kucinich is exactly right. And that's exactly what it is. The real issue here, the real thing that should be debated here is because it's not a high crime and misdemeanor for Trump to reveal what he did to the Russians. He has a legal authority to do it. The real issue should be, is it good policy to do that? And is Trump incompetent in doing a lot of this stuff? Or is Trump just dumb in revealing some of this stuff? Or letting the arrogance get the best of him, really? Because he said he was bragging about it. Those are the real questions. But you have the Democrats already calling for impeachment when that's not the real issue here. The real issue is what was discussed, and was it bad? Does it undermine our allies? I mean, Obama undermined our allies all the time. He wasn't impeached. And not only that, what's the truth in all of this? In terms of the Comey thing, it's the same thing. But like I said, the truth's not on the agenda for a lot of people. I wanted to play a voice of reason here. I played this in the first hour. I wanted to repeat it because I keep looking for voices of reason out there. This show, I'm Michael Yaffee. I say I'm your voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. I really try to be a voice of reason, but I try to find other voices of reason because you don't hear it enough anymore. You don't hear people that actually try to get to the core issues and the core things we really should be discussing here. You have the partisanship. You have the left saying he needs to be impeached, and then you have the right making this all about leaks. It's all about the leaks. Ignore what's actually Trump did. Just focus on the leaks and how we should get rid of the leaks and how the leakers are undermining our credibility. If this was against Obama, they wouldn't have cared about the leaks. So you have those two sides, and I keep thinking, what's really going on here? So I found this comment from Senator Ben Sasse, who I really like a lot. I actually have heard him speak in person one time. He's really good, really smart guy, really nice guy too, it seems like. I follow him on Twitter, always has great stuff as well. And he said this about the whole Trump-Russia thing.
Yes, there's a lot we don't know yet. There's a whole bunch of stuff being reported that may be a little bit overheated, not clear. But the reason that we need to be really careful with sources and methods is because they're the lifeblood of the intel community, and we need spies out there fighting for American interests. I think you're going to see some national media use language like illegality. That's sort of goofy because it's very, very difficult for a president to break laws related to classified information because he's the ultimate declassifier. But the debate about imprudence, that's a really important debate. And the fact that this happened with the Russians isn't helpful because they don't have our interests at heart.
They never did.
No, they want to fracture NATO, and we need to be really on guard because Russia and our interests do not align.
That's a voice of reason there. Because what he's saying is the real issue is, should we be this friendly with Russia? I mean, right now, currently, Russia is our ally. In the big scheme of things, they're said to be our ally. So to say, Trump's giving information to the enemy, well, actually, Russia's not technically our enemy right now. They're our geopolitical enemy, I guess, but they're not really our enemy.
Frenemies.
Yeah, they're kind of frenemies. It's kind of a weird situation. So the question should be, is this good policy? Is this a good decision? Is Trump doing the smart thing, the right thing? But it's not, I haven't heard enough of that today. And that's what should be discussed. And frankly, it has worried me since the beginning of Trump's campaign that he is a little too friendly with Russia. Does that mean he's in bed with the Russians or he's a Russian spy? No, it means maybe he just has that belief, that foreign policy belief that we need their help. He even said in his tweet today that he wants Russia's help in fighting ISIS. Okay? So that's his policy belief. I disagree with him on that policy decision. So let's have that debate. But because Trump just doesn't get the message out, since Trump's all over the place, since he contradicts himself, the campaign contradicts himself, and there's leaks everywhere, and then you have the newspapers who have an agenda against him, we can't get to the real debates here. 407-916-5400, text to 23680. Okay, I actually want to move on from this topic. I've done an hour and a half on this topic, really. So if you missed any of the show, check out the podcast of the show, anywhere podcasts are available. I want to get into this whole issue of removing Confederate memorials. This is another thing in Confederate stuff, all over the country. It's happening in Orlando now. This is another thing where we need a voice of reason, so I will try to be that. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Subscribe to the Beyond Reason podcast today on your Stitcher app and hear the voice of reason anytime. Your safe space for conservative thought, not for political correctness. Yaffee is back right now.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your voice of reason, your voice of truth in a world that is Beyond Reason Radio. We've been doing the show since 7 p.m. if you're listening to the live show on News Radio 102.5 WFLA. You can catch the podcast anywhere podcasts are available after the show. So I want to I want to get into a different issue here because it was on my mind today, and it comes up. It's coming up a lot. It came up before, and I love history. So I think it needs some historical perspective because this is another one of those issues where both sides are not being reasonable. And it has to do with this whole movement to remove Confederate memorials, Confederate monuments, Confederate statues, stuff like that. And it's been an issue here in Orlando where I broadcast because there is a Confederate statue at Lake Eola Park that was put there in 1917. Now, the fact that it was put there in 1917, over 4 decades? That's almost 5 decades, right after the Civil War, should tell you something there, okay? That, we'll get into that in a sec. But Buddy Dyer, the mayor in Orlando, because someone complained, decided, yes, we need to move it. So they're going to move it to a gravesite, a Confederate gravesite, get it off there because blacks especially, but some people find it offensive because they see it as a sign of racism and as a sign of slavery. Now, here's my take on this. And I'm going to get into, because before I get into my take, actually, here's usually 2 takes. You have one take that agrees with that. We need to remove all of it. It's a sign of racism. We can't move past racism until we remove all that stuff, okay? Then you have the other side that says the Civil War was not about slavery. Had nothing to do with slavery. Had to do with state rights and all that stuff. Both sides are wrong, okay? And I'm going to go over some of the history. But here's my take. I really don't like removing this stuff. It's happening, I think it happened in Louisiana recently. Now it's happening in Orlando. It's happening in other places. And here's why. And actually, a couple people on the morning show this morning texted in these comments, and I think they're brilliant points. One person made the point that, could you imagine if we Christians were offended by the Colosseum or by the Roman statues, the statues of the Roman gods in Rome, in Italy, some of the history in there, or some of the castles in some other places, or some other or the pyramids in Egypt, for instance. And we would have to remove those because as Christians we're offended because it's a symbol of paganism, it's a symbol of anti-Christianity, it's a symbol of slavery and all that stuff. Could you imagine wanting to remove that stuff? I would not want that removed. And I'm a Christian and I don't believe in that stuff, but I wouldn't want it removed because it's still history. And I think there's something to be said to preserving the history. I don't think, now obviously there are some people in this country that do, but I don't think most people that see the Confederate statue in Lake Eola are like, look at it and say, man, I am so proud of Florida's Confederate history. I am so proud of Florida's Confederate history, and I want that shown bright and shiny because we need to be so proud of our Confederate history. I don't think most people see that when they see the Confederate statue. I think there are some that do, obviously, but most probably not. Most just see it as an old landmark that's part of Lake Eola. So I don't like the idea of moving statue. It's, ISIS. Somebody else made this point on the text line this morning, and I agreed. The ISIS in the Middle East, what they're doing is they're removing all the history of all the other religions and destroying it because it's against their religion, and they find it offensive, so it has to be destroyed. And we were sad because that's history, And there's important to learning from it. There's important to preserving history. Even if we don't agree with it, even if we're not praising it, there's still an importance to preserving it. And I think a lot of what's happening is an overreaction to it. What do you think, Tom Benson? It looks like you kind of agree, or.
Oh, I agree, 100%. I mean, I'm really not one to comment because I'm from the north.
Well, yeah.
But
I'm from here, which Orlando's kind of its own thing.
It doesn't. The Confederate symbols that are out there and the monuments don't sway me or bother me one way or the other. To tell you the truth, I do see them as a part of history, and it's a good reminder maybe to see these things once in a while because it reminds us how far we have come from those days.
Yeah. Well, and I think most people do. I really think. I mean, people weren't offended. This is a recent thing. It happened after the shooting at the Charleston church when he held up the thing with the American or the Confederate flag in the picture, the shooter, and that's what started a lot of this new stuff. But it's, to me, it's not good of erasing history. Now, that being said, every time we bring up this issue, I get callers and I get texters, and I might today, and they might be upset with me, and that's fine, that say it wasn't about slavery. Had nothing to do with slavery, so it doesn't matter because the Confederates weren't rebelling because of slavery. Had nothing to do with it. It was all economic, had to do with tariffs. The tariff of 1861, even though that was before something, or the tariffs were actually really low and all that stuff. And there was a tariff crisis under Andrew Jackson that was ended up resolved for the purpose of the Union. And then they always bring up the point that Abraham Lincoln had said, even after secession, that he had no intention of ending slavery. That being said, he did have every intention of stopping its expansion and stopping its growth. But he didn't want to end slavery, and he said that because he needed the border states. The states are on the border, not the direct south, but on the border. Some of them had slaves. He needed them on his side to win the war. And to Abraham Lincoln, the Union was the most important thing. Not ending slavery, but the Union. But he was against slavery. But usually what I have to do, obviously there was economic reasons as well. Because slavery was an economic tool to the South. So, of course, economics is involved because that's what a lot of their economy was built on, was slavery. It wasn't necessarily that they were all racist, but it was their economic interest as well. But to say slavery was not involved at all is a little much for me. For instance, a lot of these states started seceding right after Abraham Lincoln was elected. Well, why? Because Abraham Lincoln was the first Republican president. What was one of the Republicans' main points why they were founded? Was to stop the spread of slavery in the western states. But I often hear all the time. So what I usually do, and the best information I can give you in history that I can give you to go back, that of course slavery was involved here, was all you have to do is read South Carolina's Declaration of the Causes of Secession. This isn't my words. This isn't some historian's words. This is their words at the time. And slavery and the slave states is mentioned throughout it. Let me get to a good point here. For one, it says it talks. I mean, I don't want to read the whole thing because it's long, but it talks about how they came to declare their own independence. They came to have their own Confederacy and so much. But it says this: we affirm the ends for which this government was instituted have been defeated, and the government itself has been destructive of them by the action of the non-slave-holding states. Why would they say non-slave-holding states if slaves had nothing to do with it? Those states have assumed the right of deciding upon the propriety of our domestic institutions and have denied the right of property established in the 15 states of the states and recognized by the Constitution. They have denounced as sinful the institution of slavery. They have permitted the open establishment among them of societies whose avowed object is to disturb the peace of the Elohim, of the property of the citizens of the other states. They have encouraged and assisted thousands of our slaves to leave their homes, and those who remain have been incited by emissaries, books, and pictures to servile insurrection. So what is it saying there? It's saying that they are upset at the North because the North has interrupted and undermined the institution of slavery in the South.
Which they see as a property right, which is really disgusting.
Well, yeah, they see, and they're saying it's a property right. They're saying the North is, obviously there's economic interest, but it was all centered around slavery. They're making the argument in their own Declaration of Secession here that the North is undermining the institution of slavery, which they see as vital to the South. And that was a big reason why they seceded. A lot of the stuff in terms of saying that, oh, it wasn't about slavery, comes from something that came years later after Reconstruction. And what it's called the myth of the lost cause. And it was something ginned up by a lot of people in the South, and I have a whole book on it called that, The Myth of the Lost Cause. Ginned up by Southern societies and a lot of the South to try to change the narrative of what the war was all about, and it was about Northern aggression and states' rights. So they come up with what's called the myth of the lost cause, and they created this narrative that it was about states' rights. The problem with that argument, and it makes this argument in the book, it's actually a pretty good book. We interviewed the guy in the Florida Roundtable, the author. His name's Edward Bonkemper III. I'd go ahead and read it. It makes a lot of good case about slavery's tariffs, all what really caused it, and the myth of the lost cause. The problem is, in terms of it being about states' rights, one thing the states were upset at, the southern states were upset at, is that the federal government would not intervene at first when slaves would escape to the North. They thought they were free in the North. The southern states wanted the federal government to get involved in the states of the North to bring those states back down to the South. And then you have the Missouri Compromise and all that stuff that was involved in that process. That's them wanting the federal government to get involved. That's different than a states' rights issue. That was a big controversy, and once again, it was focused on slavery. You have to understand context in history. That's why I always have this argument, and they say, well, Lincoln said he didn't want to end slavery. Well, he was obviously against slavery, but there was a reason why he said that, and you have to understand the context of the history to know that. But people don't want to hear the context, and then once again, this is another issue where people go online, they Google it, and they find sources that agree with their preconceived notions instead of understanding the context. But here's another thing if you don't think it's about slavery. Mississippi was one of the next states after South Carolina to secede. The governor, John Petrus, urged the legislature to convene a secession convention, and this is what he said. He said the existence or the abolition of African slavery in the southern states is now up for a final settlement. He said whether it shall, he accused Northerners of regarding slavery as a sin and urging its destruction. The North, he said, was ordering the South to decide whether it shall be peaceable and gradual abolition or speedy and violent. The convention's declaration of the causes of secession in Mississippi says our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest in the world, and makes the argument once again in dealing with slavery. So the South Carolina said they were doing it a lot because of slavery. Not the only reason, but a big reason. Mississippi, in their convention, and their governor, once again mentioned slavery. I cannot read these actual documents. This is not historians. This is actual the words of the time, and then say, oh, well, it had nothing to do with slavery. That's foolish. So I wanted to give a little history lesson. I wanted to be a voice of reason on this. That doesn't mean we need to get rid of all Confederate memorials, but we have to understand that the Confederates of the states had a vested interest in keeping slavery, and that was a big cause of the Civil War. 407-916-5400, text to 23680, where I'm going to end the show with things so beyond reason, you just can't make them up. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
You want to listen to Beyond Reason Radio live on your smartphone? Download the Beyond Reason Radio app now. Available in the Google Play or Apple App Stores. Your voice of truth in a world of fake news. Beyond Reason Radio continues right now.
Yes, welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Michael Yaffee, your voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. We went over a lot of different stuff in today's show, especially with the breaking news with the Trump administration, dealing with him leaking, saying stuff to Russians that was classified, and with this new Comey memo. The New York Times has a report that Comey is implying that Trump tried to stop the Flynn investigation. When you read the actual words, I talked about how it's not quite what it says and how none of it seems to be going to the truth. What you want to do is download the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. It's on iTunes, everywhere else, and check out the rest of the show. And got a lot into it. Make sure to share with your friends as well. And make sure to send me a friend request on Facebook or follow me on Twitter at Beyond Reason R. But I wanted to end the show with some stories, and I don't have like a liner or anything for this. I need to come up with like a cool intro to this or something, but it's stories so beyond reason, you just can't make them up. You just can't make them up. So, here is, let me just start with the headline, see what you think, Mr. Tom Benson.
All right. Let's get the audience involved. All right, go ahead.
They were kind of reluctant to get involved there a little bit.
The applause sign wasn't working correctly.
So, have you ever heard, Tom Benson, of soligamy?
Ah, I have.
So how do you say soligamy? I guess that would be right. Sologamy.
Yeah.
Soligamy.
Soligamy, yeah.
Headline from the Daily Wire, the saddest trend you've ever heard of. You can't make this up. Apparently people are now, this is by our friend Amanda Precious-Giacomo from the Daily Wire.
Uh-huh.
Says apparently people are now marrying themselves.
The ultimate narcissist.
Yes. Well, more specifically, sad, bitter feminists with a millennial-like flair for narcissism, like you said, are marrying themselves after sticking it to the patriarchy, of course, by choosing to put their careers ahead of their personal lives. In the new sad trend called soligamy, women are committing themselves to themselves with their own wedding ceremony. Dear God. How does the cake cutting work? I mean, usually you have to, do you just smash the cake in your own face? Is that what happens? What do you say? Do you may kiss yourself? I don't understand. I now pronounce you single. These women, such as self-styled soligamist Erica Anderson, throw on a white gown invite their close friends and family, and marry themselves in a legally non-binding way.
Oh,
they can't even do it in a binding way? They can't even make the real commitment? She said, Anderson said, I would describe it as women saying yes to themselves.
What do you want to do? Well, what can you do when you want to get divorced from yourself?
I have no idea. Who gets half the, I don't know how you split that up. And it's just, like I said, you just can't make it up.
Yeah.
You just can't make it up. And then there was another story. Another one you just can't make up.
Sometimes people just have too much time on their hands, you know?
Mm-hmm. Got this from Catherine Timpf in the National Review.
Uh-huh.
Says social justice blog says stupid, the word stupid, is an ableist slur. According to the post in the social justice blog Everyday Feminism, another feminism thing, the feminists have just gone nuts. The word stupid is not just a kind of mean thing to say, but you're actually an all-out ableist slur, regardless of whether you're using it to describe things or people. The blog says, in my view, the fact that this word is a slur is self-evident. Yes, stupid is an ableist slur. Let's unpack your defensiveness about that. She explains that is a reason enough to stop using it. And it's used to insult people with cognitive impairments, autism, Down syndrome, ADD, and other development disabilities.
I wouldn't agree with that at all.
For crying out loud. Now, I bet you $1 million that this person who wrote this blog has probably called Donald Trump, the president, stupid a number of times.
Oh, I'm sure.
How much do you want to bet that she has done that? Come on, some people are just stupid, and they should be called stupid, and maybe if you call them stupid, they'll get better. The history of disability in our society is rife with injustices based on intelligence. So now we're going to insult intelligence. Now we're going to look down, it used to be attack the rich, and then the whites, and now it's the intelligent.
Well, I'm safe.
No, I think you're a pretty smart guy. Oh, dear Lord. See, told you. Can't make it up. Things so beyond reason, you can't make it up. All right, I thank you all for joining me tonight. We went through a lot. Make sure to check out the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Just download the Beyond Reason radio app. And, I will be back on tomorrow at 8 p.m., 8 to 10 p.m. tomorrow. And, you have to join me, and I'll catch you guys then.
I look inside.